Flight operations continue at Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, Abuja, despite start of warning strike by aviation unions. National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control gives provisional approval for R21 malaria vaccine in Nigeria. Organized private sector rejects IMF's tax increase call. And on the commodity watch, gold of 1 year highs as investors weigh rate hike prospects. Plus, Business Express takes a look at recommendations for Nigeria at the just concluded IMF and World Bank spring meetings in Washington, D.C. This is Business Express coming to you live on the network service of the NTA. I am Musa Abubakar. Now let's bring you up to speed with business development. Nigeria's March inflation rate rose to 22.04% from 21.91% in February 2023, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS Consumer Price Index and Inflation Report. The recent figure showed 0.13% points high when compared to February 2023 headline inflation rate. According to the March inflation rate was 6.13%, percentage points higher than that of 2022, which stood at 15.92%. NBS said the contributions of items on the divisional level to the increase in the headline index are food and non-alcoholic beverages, housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuel, clothing and footwear, transport, furnishings, household equipment and maintenance, education, health, miscellaneous goods and services, restaurants and hotels, alcoholic beverage, tobacco and cola, recreation and culture and communication. IMF says African countries are facing a funding squeeze that has hit the continent really hard, but Nigeria's situation is still manageable. Director African Department of the IMF, Bebe Ro Selassie, who gave the IMF's regional economic outlook for sub-Saharan Africa, is optimistic that the prospects are still bright. Moplanda Kok reports.
Global public debt and inflation levels have risen so high as have not been seen in many decades. Africa is no doubt neck deep in debt, with Nigeria having its own share, especially with the huge debt from China. The International Monetary Fund says with shrinking budgets and reduced inflows from partners, this is eroding household purchasing power and striking at the most vulnerable. It describes the situation as the big funding squeeze.
The trade regime, the foreign exchange regime have all been very challenging and have not allowed Nigeria to robust the very strong, rates of growth that the country needs, desperately so. Second, I think it's appropriate that you look at policies in terms of their effectiveness. So a question that we have is these the policies that have been pursued over the last 3-4 years, have they indeed helped achieve the diversification that it was intended to achieve?
The IMF predicts that growth in sub-Saharan Africa is expected to slow to 3.6% based on the big funding squeeze, which is the second consecutive year of decline in sub-Saharan African growth. But the region is not powerless.
The new administration will see what they do. We would be supportive of measures that are, policies that respond and are effective in terms of addressing the diversification objective that Nigeria has, but also addressing the near-term challenges that, macroeconomically the country is facing.
Nigeria indeed is faced with tough decisions, but the Bretton Woods institutions suggest that governments must ensure that efforts to tackle climate change, monetary policy, and inflation do not crowd out basic needs like health and education. From the Washington District of Columbia, Muplang Dakok.
The organized private sector has rejected the recent call by the International Monetary Fund (IMF) on the federal government to increase taxes in order to reduce borrowing. According to the organized private sector, if the prescription is accepted by the government, it will spell disaster for the country. Specifically, the OPS warned that such advice will kill struggling businesses across the country and worsen the level of poverty in Nigeria. Organized private sector also reiterated that the $800 million loan to serve as palliatives ahead of the planned removal of subsidy was not necessary, but the government to give attention to fixing the nation's refineries with a view to making them operational before the removal of the petrol subsidy. The International Monetary Fund (IMF's) work with Nigeria is in areas of surveillance through which it monitors economic and financial development in the country and offers policy advice, lending when there is balance of payments difficulties, and support policies that are geared towards correcting laying problems and technical support. Now, today's conversation is centered on recommendations for Nigeria at the end of the just concluded spring meetings, and to do that with me is development economist Dr. Emeka Okengu. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, the IMF latest regional economic outlook for sub-Saharan Africa predicts the region's growth will decelerate to 2.6% from 3.9% last year. And well, what's your take on that?
Well, I think on a regional basis, they're talking about the deceleration. But for Nigeria, they're actually, thinking that the 3%, increase is acceptable, as against the World Bank, stating deceleration to 2.1% or something. Again, these are all statistics, and these are all targeted at your formal economy. Unfortunately, we have not formalized the whole of the Nigerian economy. So you have a lot of us, or some very light chunk, still at that underground or informal level. So when you want to start looking at your formal statistics as your basis, of aggregating your output, you might not get it all right. All right? So at 3%, not good news. At 2%, not good news. What is happening is that we are not growing. We need to do something about it. That's what's critical.
But you've seen the latest inflation figures.
Yes, 22%. It was expected. It's going to go higher because the indices, the factors that trigger it has not abated. We're talking about insecurity. We're talking about climate change and crisis. We're talking about lack of storage and energy. So all those factors, you haven't mitigated them. So why wouldn't they rise?
Well, we've been tightening in terms of monetary policy. Or is it the issue of now imported inflation from other countries, like the supply chain disruption? We have seen rising cost of energy in other countries. So definitely it's meant to actually affect production in those other countries.
Haven't you always imported inflation? You're not running an economy, that has foundation. You're actually running what you call a value-added economy, because you have not been able to drill down and drill back. Are you truly productive? Are you truly manufacturing vis-a-vis taking into consideration the indices of a production? Do you have it end to end? All right. So if you want to use the word imported inflation, why don't you also use the word imported policy statistics, to grow your economy? Your GDP is also imported, because what you're doing is that you don't have a GDP that's indigenous, as it were, that is totally and completely indigenous. What you're just doing is to value add, and then try to now aggregate from certain levels.
Okay, let's turn our attention to the issue of this funding squeeze. The Bretton Woods Institution also say funding squeeze will continue to hit Nigeria, and they are actually suggesting that we increase tax to reduce borrowing. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would first say, what are their recommendations for the European countries who are also facing funding squeezes? I mean, you have more European economies, facing the risk of a deacceleration, as you've said, than we have in Nigeria. You have more economies collapsing. You have more banks, collapsing in the Western world than you have them collapsing in the, emerging economies. So sometimes when people talk about IMF, I mean, without sounding too patronizing, where were they when the world economy was collapsing? I mean, because you see, you're trying to make this a Nigerian thing. Well, we have issues here in Nigeria, no doubt about it. But I mean, we're not any worse off than any other country. Okay, inflation.
But come to think of it, our revenue to GDP ratio is low.
Because your production is low.
So
revenue to GDP is all about what are you doing to be able to generate revenue, and this is why they say tax more people. I mean, how many people do you have in the tax net? And I'm saying to you that your formal economy is squeezed, our manufacturing center is dying, and you're saying tax more people. Tax what? Tax production. What are we producing?
So now we need to promote production.
You need to understand that to increase your revenue, okay, you need to create new prosperity patterns. So it's not about saying, okay, tax people, and then you're earning 100,000 naira and somebody is taxing you 40,000. How does that make sense? And remember that you're running the PAYE system. Okay, and also now, even at the business, I think under 25 million or something, you're not supposed to be paying tax. So it's simple as it's complex. What we need to do is to, and I keep telling you this each time we talk about tax. Okay, how come we have so much arable land wasting? What are we doing with it? How come we have 320 dams in Nigeria? What are we doing with them? These new prosperity, pathways we can begin to grow. Climate change presents us with a lot of sun. Everybody is going the way of hybrid. Everybody is going the way of hydrogen cell fuels. These are energies that are coming from the sun. I saw you talking about somebody, removing a first subsidy and then paying people palliatives. Okay, how come you are not getting alternatives? Okay, that will now give a proper alternative to your, fuel systems. People are going the way of electric. All right, people are going the way of cell fuels. People are going the way of methanol, Musa.
Yeah, but do we have these resources in Nigeria? It seems like we are talking about fuel because we have these things in abundance.
By 9 o'clock, can you wear what you're wearing and stand outside? That's sun energy, bro. We are flaring 2.2 billion cubic feet of gas. That's methanol.
Yeah.
Okay? All right? Like I said to you, we have 320, dams, basically just there as a artifacts, if you may, or national sepulchres, okay, without sounding, rude or something. But what's important is you're looking at this. Somebody says, okay, IMF says, the labor have said, okay, repair the refineries. If you repair the refineries, is it going to bring down the cost of your PMS when you are pricing it against the dollar? So that's what the issues are. What has happened to our STI? Where have we gotten it? How come we are not looking at these natural alternatives people keep talking about, on a daily basis that face us every day? Now, Naseni has put in about $300-something million to do solar cells. How come they are not putting $50 million into electric cars? I said to you the last time we spoke, Kenya had removed subsidy on PMS, and Kenyans are not on the streets. Do you know why? Because before they removed it, they went the way of electric cars and batteries. That's how you are forward thinking. And you're not fixated to this, to this petrol that seems to have become our Chile sales.
Okay, amidst this global squeeze we're actually experiencing, we have a government that will soon come on board. What way do you advise them to look in terms of funding? Because there will be so much, there's always so much project to allocate resources to, like education, agriculture, and other sectors.
When this government was coming in 8 years ago, I think it was in this NTA studios, I said, please don't think that you're a new government. You're a Nigerian government, and it's a continuum. So what these guys should do, like I said, is they must go back 16 years into our democracy, or 20 years into our democracy, to look at those policies that other administrations, Nigerian administrations before them had done, and then look for solutions in them. During the Jonathan administration, we had a lot of reforms, a lot of reports, on our reforms, port reforms, rail reforms, transport reforms.
I'm talking about funding now.
I'm coming. This is how your funding come. Okay, you just don't go to borrow money and then start throwing their problems. You need to have a process. And if you're going to be funding education, how many people are you going to be educating? And then when you finish giving a education, what industries are going to be engaging them? So it's not enough for you to be able to throw $1 trillion into education and building new schools. It's enough for you to also build the industries and the factories that take out those skills. Now, what does this mean? You are not just going to be teaching people to graduate from schools. You're going to be equipping them to now contribute to your national development framework or your national development, architecture master plan. This is how you begin to tie funding to development and development, into some kind of sustainable, national architecture. If you don't do this, you're going to just be looking at education and say, okay, fine, we'll have 13 million children out of school. Yes, you do. Build primary schools, fine. Build secondary schools, fine. Build universities, you train the 13 million of them. And by the end of the day, they can't get a job. Have you done anything?
Now, before I let you go, what is the way forward for better economic growth?
Is, I think for once we should start treating governance as governance.
And besides that, when you tell us the way forward, what should we take from the spring IMF and World Bank spring meetings?
For me, as far as I'm concerned, it's a policy advice. Okay, and let us please come back home and look at it based against, or juxtapose it against what you call socio-economic, political economic, cultural economic realities. All right, it is only us that are wearing the shoes that should be able to know where it is. I mean, you're asking a country where you have more than 86% of a country living under the breadline to increase taxes. How does that sit with anybody? You're asking a country that has 200 million people and generating less than 5,000 megawatts of electricity to increase tax. Where would the industries get the energy to run? Okay, you're asking a country that has had infrastructure deficit, amounting to less than 5% of required infrastructure is in place to increase tax. Now, you don't just, yes, I am, and that's why I started by saying to you, these European countries that are sinking, can we also look at the advice the MF has given to them, and where were they when those economies were sinking?
But just as you said, it's just an advice. I guess they must.
We must treat this as one.
Okay.
It makes sense to us, we take it. It doesn't make sense to us, we take what is more real, what can work for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Emeka Okengwu. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure to be here, it's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. Now moving on. Oil prices were steady on Monday as investors eye Chinese economic data for signs of demand recovery in the world's second largest oil consumer. Brent crude futures nudged 8 cents lower to $86.23 a barrel, while U.S. Texas Intermediate crude was at $82.38 a barrel, down 14 cents. Both contracts notched their fourth weekly gain last week, the longest such streak since May 2022. The goal of 1-year highs as investors weigh rate hike prospects. Let's see prices of other commodities in the market. Now, investors lost 601 billion naira as sell-off persists in stock market.
The market opened for 4 trading days last week as the federal government of Nigeria declared Friday 7th April 2023 and Monday 10th April 2023 as public holidays to mark the Easter celebration. The NGX All-Share Index and market capitalization depreciated by 2.08% to close the week at 51,893.94 basis points and 28.2 trillion naira. All other indices finished lower, with the exception of NGX Consumer Goods and NGX Sovereign Bond indices, which appreciated by 0.05% and 1.54%, while the NGX ASM, NGX Oil and Gas, and NGX Growth indices closed flat. At a turnover of 2.8 billion shares worth 10.9 billion naira in 15,686 deals was traded by investors on the floor of the exchange. The conglomerate industry led the activity chart with 1.7 billion shares valued at 2.4 billion naira traded in 931 deals. The financial services industry followed with 590.7 million shares worth 5.6 billion naira in 7,869 deals. The third place was the ICT industry with a turnover of 313.7 million shares. A total of 525 units of exchange-traded products CTPs valued at 591,412 naira 35 kobo were traded in 28 deals, as well as a total of 5,200 units of federal government bonds valued at 5.1 million naira were traded in 18 deals. 18 equities appreciated in price during the week, 39 equities depreciated in price, while 99 equities remained unchanged. Boss Deebo, Business Express.
And our global stock update is next.
European stock markets were cautiously higher Monday as investors look ahead to major earnings week on Wall Street that will shed more light on the state of the U.S. economy. The DAX and the French CAC rose marginally, while UK's FTSE topped 0.51%. Asian markets finished broadly higher, with stocks in Hong Kong leading the region. The Hang Seng Index was up 1.68%, while China's Shanghai Composite gained 1.42%, and Japan's Nikkei 225 rose 0.07%. U.S. stock futures were flat, with investors preparing for more quarterly earnings reports. Futures tied to the S&P 500 gained about 0.02%, while Nasdaq 100 notched down 0.13%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average futures ticked up 0.2%. The bears dominated market sentiment in the African region as major stocks traded in negative territory. Tunisia's Tun Index was down the most at 0.37%. Namibia's overall index declined 0.16%, while South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40 dipped 0.05%.
Well, that's it. Business Express returns Tuesday by 9:30 a.m. I'm Musa Bakar. Thanks for your company.